square footage or living area, or sometimes heated living area. It could be referred to in all these different ways. Square footage, heated living area, or just living area. Is this something that is important in marketing property?
Yes.
Very.
Do most buyers expect to see this on listings, and do people shop based on square footage? Is that something that comes up all the time when we start talking about residential property?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things I want to point out, if you'll notice, and this is, by the way, not a picture. Well, it is a picture, but it's not just a picture. This is a booklet that's published by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission that's available. You can order one anytime you'd like. Notice it says here, what kind of square footage guidelines are these?
North Carolina.
Yeah, they're North Carolina, but specifically what kind of property?
Residential.
Residential. So did you apply what we're about to talk about to a warehouse?
No.
No.
Oh, these rules only apply to residential property. So do you apply this to a townhouse?
Yes.
Single family home?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Condominiums, if they're residential condos.
Yeah.
Yes. Any residential property, these are the rules that you use to determine how much square footage it has. Is everybody with me on that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Seth just linked you to the electronic version of the booklet if you'd ever like to take a look at it, which is obviously handy to have once you do have a real estate license. And this is why it's important that you know these rules. Look at down here. It says if a broker chooses to disclose square footage, they are responsible for the accuracy of the number. Another way of saying you're responsible for the accuracy is that you can be sued if the number you use is inaccurate. Now, I'm gonna share a story with you, and I'm gonna come back to this slide. Don't worry about that. I want to share a quick story with you and show you why it's important to be accurate with square footage.
Oh God.
I got a phone call from an attorney one time, and the attorney was representing a property owner. And the property owner needed an expert witness on square footage rules in North Carolina. And they had been given my name. And they said, this guy's an expert, which is debatable, but they had been given my name. They needed an expert witness. Where does an expert witness usually need? Where do you have need for an expert witness?
In a lawsuit.
In a court of law.
In a lawsuit. This person was suing someone. Matter of fact, they were suing another real estate agent, a fellow real estate agent. And the reason they were suing the fellow real estate agent was for a misrepresentation. What does that mean? We talked about that word last week. What does it mean when you misrepresent something?
You said
You gave the information.
Information that turned out to be what?
Wrong.
Wrong. A misrepresentation of living area. That's what they were suing this real estate agent for. Here's what they were told when they purchased their current property. When they purchased their current property, it was listed at, and by the way, this was way back in 2006 when they bought that property, long time ago. When they bought that property back in 2006, it was listed at 3,248 square feet. When I was contacted, and this was back in 2017 at this point in time, They had just had the property measured by a licensed appraiser. Same people have owned this house. Now, it hadn't bothered them in all this time. But they finally got around to having an appraiser measure the house. And the appraiser came back and said, your house is 2,848 square feet.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Is that
That's
a
a difference. Oh.
Yes. It's 500 square feet.
That's a pretty
Large.
big difference, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So they were upset by this. And let me tell you why they were upset. Let me give you some of the backstory about why they upset and why it played out like this. They bought the house in 2006 and they've been happy with it all the time. Fast forward to 2017 and they want to sell. And they hired a real estate agent to sell it for them. And their real estate agent gave them an estimated market value. And the agent did a CMA. How many of you have ever heard of a CMA? You ever heard of a CMA, right? The agent did a CMA and they said, okay, well, I think your house would sell for about $600,000 right now. And the sellers were super excited about that number. But here's the thing, that the new listing agent, when they're doing a CMA, now this is before they even have the listing, this is when they're trying to get the listing. They're looking at the old listing and basing their CMA on the old square footage number. Does that make sense for everybody? Now, the new agent did their job right. When they took the listing, before they marketed that thing at 3,248 square feet, they got it professionally measured. They were the ones that got this measurement of 2,848. Is everybody following me so far? But when they got that measurement of 2,848, does this number change? Does their opinion of the property's value change based on the fact that it's 400 square feet smaller than they thought it was when they were estimating its value?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
They didn't even know they were given the wrong information.
So they come back to the seller and they say, no, now, based on the fact that we now have this correct square footage, I really think tops, we're looking at $550,000. Is somebody hot over this $50,000?
Yes.
Yes.
They're mad. They're real big mad. Real mad. Real mad. And it's not their current agent who screwed up. Who screwed it up?
The original listing agent.
The original listing agent all the way back here in 2006. Does that make sense for everybody? This is a mistake. This is a misrepresentation. And there is no statute of limitations on being sued for misrepresentation as a real estate agent in North Carolina. Does it matter that it was 11 years previous, or it doesn't matter? Doesn't matter. So the attorney that was calling me was representing these folks, and they were suing this listing agent way back here from 2006. Now, is that agent going to be shocked to get a lawsuit filed against them from 11 years previous?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to tell you how the conversation went when they asked me to be an expert witness. They said, well, we need an expert witness because we're suing a real estate agent. And I said, I don't believe I'm interested in that. I don't know who you're suing. It could be a good friend of mine. I have to teach these people in CE class. It's not really the thing I want to do. And the attorney said, well, it pays $4,000. I said, do I need to wear a tie or a coat? Exactly what clothes are required for my testimony on this case? Everybody has a price. Apparently mine is $4,000.
How did that court case go?
How did it go? Quickly. Very quickly. Because here's what was easy to figure out, and this is exactly what my expert testimony and what my opinion was. I went back and I looked at the property tax records from back in 2006. And coincidentally enough, guess what Wake County had listed in the property tax records for the square footage back in 2006?
3248.
3248 on the nose. Bingo. That tells me something instantly right there. The agent never measured that property. Because there is no way that two people are going to measure the same home that's that size and come up with exactly the same number. And there is certainly no way that that just magically happens to be the same number that was in the property tax records. But here's why that number is so unreliable. They guess. They don't actually go inside the property at all when they come up with the square footage for property taxation purposes. They do it all from the outside. And what they did in this case was they assumed that the third floor walk-up attic was finished, because it was in most of these homes in this neighborhood, except in this house, it's not finished. And so the property tax records were wrong. And the listing agent, rather than measuring the property themselves, had simply taken those property tax records. Well, the buyer bought the property assuming the property was bigger. And I'm going to tell you exactly how the case came out. Here's exactly what the judge said. The judge said, well, this is easy. He asked me one question. Mr. Everett, if you were the listing agent on this property, would you have measured the property? Yes, sir. In your opinion, did the listing agent measure the property? No, sir. Thank you. That was it. $4,000. That was it. But here's how the judgment came down. They went back to when they purchased this property in 2006, and the judge says, well, by my math, they paid $100 per square foot, or roughly thereabout, in 2006, which means they're owed $100 a square foot for every one that they didn't get, times 400 square feet, judgment of $40,000 to the plaintiff against the listing firm 11 years after the fact. So is this a big deal, knowing how to determine living area and making sure you got this number right?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. This is self-preservation, if nothing else. Okay.
That makes my stomach
Did they also
hurt.
try to get their taxes back?
I don't know what they did about that. I'm sure they probably filed an appeal with the county, but that's a whole different process, for that. They could go back and show a mistake. They probably won't get the back ones back. They may get it reduced in the meantime, though, for future taxation purposes. But that's why this is such a big deal. Now that we've said that, you want me to give you the good news?
Yes.
You don't have to worry about it if you don't want to. Look at this right here. It says living area is what?
Not a material fact.
Not a material fact. So we don't have to what?
Disclose.
Disclose it. Unless we what?
Measure it.
We
Measure it and want to.
choose to. We make the choice to disclose. Is everybody with me on that?
Yeah.
Yes.
But I'm about to rain on your parade again. It's not really much of a choice. Are most sellers going to be very demanding that you list square footage?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So realistically, are you going to have to measure the property?
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to do it because your sellers are going to expect you to publish a square footage, and you're going to be held responsible for its accuracy, And it is absolutely tremendous that you get this number right, correct. Because if you don't, you really do open yourself up to a lot of liability down the road. Is everybody with me on this?
Sometimes in the deed, it says the the square feet in the living area square feet or the construction, I think, in the deed. I don't know if you guys, it's supposed to be in the deed too, right?
The square footage is not usually in the deed because deed is for land. You know, the deed is for the land. Now, it may have the square footage of the land on the deed, but not, we're talking about square footage living area of the structure. And so that would generally not be found on a deed.
Okay, so.
But it doesn't, to your point though, it doesn't matter where you find it. You can't use those numbers. You can't use it if you get it from the tax records. You can't even use the builder's floor plans. You can't use it from anywhere other than you go measure the property. Or there's one other option, hire an appraiser. That's the one expert that's higher level than you are. How many of you right now are thinking to yourself, I don't trust myself doing this? How many, be honest, how many of you thinking, I don't want to be sued for $40,000. I don't trust myself doing this. Every one of you's got your hands up right now. Hire an appraiser. Hire an appraiser. Because they are trained specifically how to measure properties. When you hire them, do you think that takes some of the liability off of your shoulders? Do you think that the liability gets relieved from you because you hired an even bigger expert than yourself?
Can you use an old appraisal? Like if
you cannot use an old appraisal by itself. You can use it as a guideline and verify it, but remember, things could have changed. They could have added on to the property. They could have knocked walls down. They could have done things, and that's why they don't want you to strictly use an old appraisal. So if you had an old appraisal, maybe you don't need to go hire an appraiser to do a new one, but you need to go out and verify the measurements on the old appraisal. You need to go out and do measurements, but could you take their drawing and just verify, okay, it says this wall is 12.5 feet. And once you verify that, you just put a check. And if you verify all the measurements, then you know that the square footage is correct. So you could still use it, but just not by itself. If it was an old one.
I mean, that's a lot of mathing and geometry and drawing that, you know, a lot of
it is.
I am not good at.
Hire the appraiser.
And that's why you hire an appraiser.
And also for setting the value of the house, the actual value, so the seller, could agree to put the property in a real price.
Yeah, right. It could really influence what the seller wants to list the property for sure. And so I hire an appraiser. Work out a deal with a local appraiser that you get them to measure all of your listings for you. And they can provide you with a nice little drawing. It's very professional. And you've taken some of the liability off yourself. They know how to do it. They do it every day, all day.
Would that count like when you do a closing and you do all your final numbers? Is that like the official appraisal, or is there another?
See, that's an appraisal a buyer has for their loan purposes. That's too late for us here. When are we marketing the square footage?
Before you list it?
Way before we even list the property, right? So we'd have to have it measured by an appraiser before we ever put it on the market, if we were going to rely on an appraiser's measurement. So we're talking about, something completely separate from the buyer's appraisal process.
That's what I wanted to make sure.
Yep. Completely separate from that. Priscilla, that's the part we're going to talk about next. What counts as living area? I want to first impress upon you the reason that you have to be accurate, and impress upon you that you cannot use. So if you see somebody say, oh, I just used the tax records, is that wrong right away?
Yeah.
Yes. If they say, oh, I used an old appraisal and no problem, is that a problem?
Old appraisal, yes.
Yes. It has to be measured specifically for this new listing when it's about to go on the market. Okay. Now that we understand that, we want to talk about what spaces are considered living area. And what I will tell you, it has to be all three of these things, not just one. It has to be 1 and 2 and 3 for a space to be considered living area. It has to be all 3 of these. Now, here's what I will tell you all for test purposes. Many of you will try to make this far more complex than it is for test purposes. You will try to apply. So here's what I want you to repeat after me right now. I want you to repeat this. I will not apply rules that do not exist.
I will not apply rules that do not exist.
When it comes to square footage, I will not apply rules that do not exist.
When it comes
to square footage,
I will not apply rules that do not exist.
One more. These are the only 3 rules.
These are the only
3 rules.
So don't repeat after me anymore, and don't apply rules that don't exist. That's one thing that people do all the time when they start getting tested on this. Well, what if this? What if is it one of these 3 rules? Then don't worry about it. It really is going to be that straightforward. So let's talk about what the 3 rules are. Now, notice I said it's 1 and 2 and 3. It's not. If it meets only criteria number 2, is it living area?
No.
No. If it meets criteria 1 and 3, but it doesn't meet 2, is it living area?
No.
No. It has to be all 3 of these. It's like a checklist. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
You got to hit all 3 of these points for a space to be considered living area.
Okay.
So the first thing I want you to think of, I'm going to do a little white screen, and then we're going to come back to these rules. When we're looking at a property, when we're looking at a home, we're just going to do a very simple one here. And let's say this is the garage. Okay. When you're looking at something like this, a very, just ultra simple floor plan, a couple things to keep in mind. Number 1, the most obvious one that people won't forget, is the amount of living area going to be dictated by the number of floors that are in this property?
Yes.
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 If this is a 2-story, what are we going to have to do with our numbers at some point?
Double it.
We're going to have to say times 2, right? If it's a 3-story, we're going to have to say times what?
3.
Times 3. So that's kind of the first and most obvious thing. Here's what I want to say to you. A home, any home, only has 1 living area. Homes do not have multiple living areas. Is everybody okay with what I just said? The home has 1 living area. That living area must remain continuous. What if they have this cute little she shed out in the backyard? And it's got air conditioning and it's got plumbing and it's got a bedroom and a bathroom. It's just a little guest house back there.
Is it heated?
Well, it's heated. Oh yeah, got its own fireplace. And it's got a nice little walkway to the house here. Is this back here, this part of this?
No.
No, under no circumstances.
Directly accessible.
That is a different building. That is a different space. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
What if you had a walkway that was covered?
If it was a walkway that was covered, they wouldn't be 2 different buildings. If it was covered, heated, enclosed, then they would be what?
Be square footage.
One building. If this was a covered walkway that ran all the way here to here and it had a roof over it all the way down and it was heated and enclosed, okay, that's all one building. But as long as they're separate, there's no way that's going to count as living area.
Okay.
It's separate.
Now, how do you add that into a listing? Like, how do you say it's just there's two buildings, one that's the main house and one that's the
you don't include
extra,
Here's the
or
answer
not
to
at
the
all?
question. You don't add it into the listing. What you do
Okay.
is you make a statement that says there's a separate guest house. But when
Okay.
it comes to square footage,
It
a
doesn't even matter.
house has one living area. So here's what
Gotcha.
you get to do, Kate. You get to pick which one you want to market as the living area of this house. Do you want to market this living area or do you want to market this living area? Because you can't market both and you can't combine the two.
I want the bigger one.
So I would think most people would say this is the living. Does that make sense for everybody? As far as the way we market property, how many living areas does the house have? One.
Unilateral.
This also applies for spaces that are under the same roof, but are not continuously part of the living area. What if we have a finished basement? Beautiful finished basement, but the stairs to get to it are outside. What if you have to go out the back door onto a deck and go down the deck and go in a separate door to get to the basement? Well, yeah, that's living area down there, but it's a separate living area, correct?
Yes.
So
Yes.
can you market both of those as one living area?
No.
No. Can you add them together?
No.
No. So you got to pick. Are you going to market it as the living area that's in the basement, or are you going to market it as the living area that's in the house? Which one do you think it's going to be?
House.
The above ground space, right? Are y'all following me on this? A home has one living area for your marketing purposes. Now, that doesn't mean, I'm not saying that something like this guest building wouldn't have value. Of course, you would say in the listing, there's a guest house that includes another 400 square feet. But in that number where you look on the listing and it says total living area, is that guest house going to be counted in that number?
No.
No, it will not. Is everybody with me on that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So Travis, just to confirm, like, it's not like saying you can't get that house measured. It's just saying that when you're marketing that property and putting it on the internet, you're only going to do the one living space.
That's exactly right. Because when you put your listing out there and you're putting your stuff in the MLS, it's going to have a field that says total square feet. And you're going to put 2,200 because that's what this is. And this thing back here is another 400. And then you may put in the notes, there is an additional 400 square feet in the finished guest house out back, but you cannot include that in this number. That total square footage number is only going to be the main property, the main structure.
Shelby Austin just asked a question that kind of tags along to this one. So if there is a bonus room above the garage that is finished and heated, but the door to the bonus room is in the garage and not technically inside the house, that wouldn't be considered one living space or part of the square
I wish I
footage?
could draw on Shelby's comment there. Just eliminate the word technically. Technically is not needed there, Shelby. It's not in the house. She says, if there's a bonus room above the garage that's finished and heated, but the door to the bonus room is in the garage and not technically inside the house. There's no technically about it. If the door to the bonus room is inside the garage, is it inside the house?
No.
No.
Because the garage is not inside the house.
Because the garage is not inside the house for living area purposes. And so, is that bonus room going to count as living area as part of the main house living area? What is the answer to that?
No.
It will not.
Unfortunately, no.
I don't care how fancy it is. It's not going to count. How do we feel about that criteria so far? Because that's the one that throws people for a loop the most of the 3 rules. Okay? So let's go back and let's look at these rules. Number 1, the space has to be permanently heated. The space has to be permanently heated. It doesn't say any more than that. Don't add rules that aren't there. Does it say air conditioned?
No.
No.
Then don't worry about air conditioning. It doesn't, it's not a requirement. It's only a requirement.
wants to, but it's not a requirement.
That's right. It's only a requirement in North Carolina that it be permanently heated. Now, the key word here is permanently heated. Permanently means that the heat has to be installed. It has to be attached. Nailed, screwed, glued, buried in the ground. Heat. Is a fireplace permanently installed heat?
Yes.
Yes. No matter whether it's a wood-burning fireplace or a gas-burning fireplace or even an electrical fireplace that's installed, is that a permanent heat source?
Yes.
It is. Okay. How about radiators, baseboard heaters? Would those be permanent heat sources? Yeah.
Yeah.
How about a kerosene heater sitting in the middle of the floor?
No.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. I was thinking of the ones that were in the.
You don't know what a kerosene heater is. You're too young. You ain't
My
know.
granny had. She had one that was like a old timey in the floor heater, but.
Yeah, you too young to know what a kerosene heater is. How about a space heater that plugs into the wall?
No.
No, absolutely not. Those are temporary. Those don't meet the requirement. So first thing you're going to look at is the space that is in question permanently what?
Heated.
Heated. Okay. Number 2, is it the space in question finished with interior finishes? And I'm going to challenge Amanda to rethink her statement just a second ago. Is it finished with interior finishes? Last I checked, an 8-foot wide rolling door, Amanda, is not an interior finish. Because you're talking about that garage. See, that's what people do. They don't apply these rules as they're written. But my garage is air conditioned and heated. Does it have a big ass wide door in it? That's not an interior finish. Last I looked, human doors are not 8 feet wide. That's a garage door. And it's the door that makes it a garage. Believe it or not, in North Carolina, the number 1 feature of a garage is a garage door. It's not the rest of it. Can you have a garage that's heated with beautiful like epoxy floors and finished walls? And I mean, I've sold houses where the garages were nicer than some houses, but they were still a garage and not living area simply because of the doors, because that's not an interior finish. Okay. All right. Minimum ceiling height. Minimum. Now, the state doesn't care how tall ceilings can be. Could you have 30-foot cathedral ceilings?
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure. These are minimum ceiling heights. So for flat ceilings, if your room looks like this, the minimum the height the ceiling can be is 7 feet. And most rooms do look like that, correct?
Correct.
Here's the other way a room could look. How many of you have seen like bonus rooms that are shaped like that with sloping ceilings? You know, and sometimes they actually go all the way to a point. You know, sometimes they go all the way up to the roof line like this. You know, but more commonly, they look like this. They go up on each side, and then they have a flat part in the middle. Okay? When you have a sloping ceiling like that, I'm going to try to draw it a little bit more dramatically so you can see what I'm about to do here. when you have this sloping ceiling like this, the flat part, this part right here, has to be at least how tall? Flat ceilings always have to be at least how tall?
Minimum 7.
7 feet. The sloped part right here has to be at least 5 feet. That right there has to be at least 5 feet.
So if it goes down to 4, then that wouldn't count?
If it so, let me give you a diagram of like a room, how a room would work if it went down to 4 feet. If you had a room, and we're looking at it from the end, like this, and the ceiling went up, and then you had a flat section in here, and let's say we measured this right here, and this is 8 feet. Okay, so are we good on the flat part?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Now we measure here. We pick a spot, and right here, it's 6 feet. Are we okay there?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
And we keep measuring, and we get to right here. It's 5 feet.
That's okay.
That's okay, correct?
Yeah.
But over here is going to be less than 5 feet, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Now we do the same thing on the other side. We measure, and here is 6 feet. We measure here, it's 5 feet. The room is only going to exist, as far as we're concerned, from here to here. Any portion of the room where the ceiling is less, the slope part of that ceiling is less than 5 feet, doesn't exist for square footage purposes. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
So for square footage purposes, we would measure the room, the width of the room between these two right here. Is everybody following on that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because anything outside of that is too short as far as North Carolina law goes. Anything less than 5 feet is too short.
This is Anthony's chapter. He is a appraiser.
Yeah, that's right. Should let him do it. Okay. Priscilla just asked a good question. I like that question, Priscilla. Priscilla asked, what if the whole house has ceilings that are 6.5 feet?
You ain't got no.
What is the square footage of that house?
You go on the outside, or
if the whole house has ceilings of less than 7 feet, how much living area does it have?
Zero.
Zero. If there's no permanent heat in the house, how much living area does it have?
Nothing. Got nothing.
Zero. We only can count space as living area if it meets these 3 rules.
I'm just
wait a
coming
minute.
up with
There are
questions
older
now.
houses that don't have 7-foot ceilings. So you're saying that they
The
can.
square footage of those houses by rule in North Carolina is 0.
Wow.
That if a real estate agent was marketing that property, the square footage listed on the listing would be 0. Total living area, 0.
Okay.
And that's why I bring it up, because there are properties that exist like that. That's why you just got to take these rules for what they are. Are we okay so far? So let's say we've checked number 1 and we're good. We're permanently heated. We've checked number 2 and we've got interior finishes and we meet the minimum ceiling height. Now we have to go to number 3. Number 3 is the one where your bonus room is going to get eliminated in the garage. from earlier. It says it has to be directly accessible from the rest of the living area in the house. Remember what I said? The house only has one living area. What that means is if you have to leave the living area, go to an area that's not living area to get to this space, then that space is not living area. I don't care how nice it is. Now, could we rectify that? If we had this super nice bonus room above the garage and we wanted it to be counted as living area, could we change that? I mean, it would have to sacrifice something, but could we change that?
Yes.
Do what? What could we do?
Stairs on the
Stairs
inside.
Yeah, stairs from
Stairs that were what?
Connected.
inside the living area.
Directly
In the living
accessible.
area.
Inside the living area. That's exactly right. Relocate the stairs, put them inside the living area where they are living area themselves and connect it that way. Or could we finish the whole garage if we wanted to? If we finished the garage, not only would the garage be added as square footage, but so would the bonus room, which was on the other side of the garage. Think of it like a maze. We can't get to that other space without connecting the garage that's between them. You know, somehow these spaces have to be directly connected to each other to be considered living area. I showed a house one time, or not showed, went to a listing presentation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when I went to the listing presentation, the sellers had finished their basement with basically a house, and it was a daylight, basement, had its own door, its own private entry, but their adult son lived at home with them. He was 34, 35 and lived at home, and they wanted him to have his own space. So they had finished the basement and put a separate entrance in for it. It had its own kitchen. And I don't mean junk now. This granite countertop, stainless steel appliances, dishwasher, stove. It had a bathroom with a big old walk-in tiled shower and a jacuzzi tub. Had a bedroom with tray ceilings and a closet with cedar-lined closets. I mean, he was spoiled. It had a big area for a pool table, a fireplace over in the living room, had a living room space down there. I mean, this was a house in the basement and had its own separate entrance. What was interesting was when they finished it, so if you can imagine, let me do another little white screen here for you because I think it's easier. So here's if you're looking overhead, here's the basement. And here are the stairs coming down from upstairs. So there were stairs coming down that ran along the front side of the house. And there's a little landing right down here at the bottom. Well, when you got to the bottom of the stairs in the basement, you were in the laundry room, which was unfinished. And then there was a wall right here. And the rest of this was, this was like kitchen right here. And here was the bath. And there was a bedroom. And then a family room or living room with a big old pool table. The whole rest of that was all, and it had doors right here that went out to a covered patio. And he came and went through those doors. But there was a door right here that went into the laundry room. And basically they shared use of the laundry room. Is everybody following me on that? Mom and Dad lived upstairs. They brought their laundry down and did it in the laundry room. He brought his laundry in and did it in the laundry room. The laundry room is the only thing that's unfinished amongst this. Everything else is finished. House upstairs is beautiful. House downstairs is beautiful. And this lady wanted to put this house in the market. And I told her, I said, what do you think? I'm not even going to say what I said. What do y'all think was the first piece of advice I gave her? I said, we have to do this before we can put your house on the market.
Finish
the laundry room.
Finish the laundry room. Because from a living area perspective, what happens to that entire beautiful basement when I go to market that property if that laundry room stays unfinished?
It's not
Doesn't
good.
count.
It doesn't count. The only way I can count that as living area is if I finish this laundry room, so that when you come downstairs from the main living area of the house, you're in a finished stairwell, you get down here in a finished laundry room. Can a laundry room count as living area as long as it meets the criteria?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And if it opens on to this and that's finished as well, then now this square footage gets added to the rest of the house. Let me tell you something, folks. This down here was 1,400 square feet.
Wow.
Do you think it was worth finishing her laundry room to add an additional 1,400 square feet to the listing of that house?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I don't know why they didn't do it to begin with.
Well, she didn't do it to begin with because she wanted the separation from her son. She really wanted them, and they treated it like two separate houses. I said, but here's the problem. That's how I'm going to have to sell it. You don't want me to sell it that way. I understand you lived here that way, but you want me to sell it as one big house with a beautiful finished basement. The only way I can do that is if it's all one space. We got to make it all one space.
Okay.
Okay? We all good now? Good. Good, good, good. Those are the three criteria. There you go, Anthony. Anthony's getting the plug in. He said, if you need a measurement, you contact him. Seth, write down his information.
I know, I'm looking at it.
There you go. No, I mean, it's you can never have too many of those contacts in this business.
Right.
Now, I'm going to help y'all cheat. I'm going to leave these criteria up. And I'm going to ask you a question. Cherry is listing a house for sale, and in doing her research for listing the property, she discovers that the third floor attic, which was finished at some point in the last 10 years, was never permitted with the local county government. The space is heated, accessed directly from other living spaces within the home, and meets all other requirements. Should Cherry market this space as living area? So you answer that in the chat. Should she market this as living area?
What was the first part you said to the whole situation?
I said Cherry is listing a property for sale, and she's doing her research, and she finds that the third floor walk-up attic, which was finished at some point in the last 10 years, was never permitted with the county. And she finds that the space is permanently heated, is directly accessed, and otherwise meets all requirements. Should she market the property as living area?
Yes.
Yes.
They meet requirements.
Yes.
It's a living area. It doesn't mean
Here would be my question for those of you all that said no. Where the hell does it say permitted on this list? I told you from the beginning, don't make up rules that what?
Don't apply.
That
Don't
are
exist.
not there.
I do have a question.
Go for it.
Since you specified walk up,
Yep.
does that mean that even like if say somebody had an attic or something like that they had finished, it met all the requirements, but it was accessible only by a pull down ladder?
That's
or
not
pull down set of stairs. Does that not count?
Yeah, no, that's not an interior finish. That would fail number two, the criteria number 2. Pull down stairs are not an interior finish.
What will we classify as interior finishes?
Interior finishes are somewhat a gray area, but there are some things which are no-goes. I mean, you don't need to know that. because for testing purposes, they're not going to try to tease things out in that manner. I mean, they're going to be pretty clear about, does something meet this criteria, does something not. The big thing you have to do is get out of your way and only apply the criteria. In fact, didn't I go to pretty painful extent there to say it met the criteria? I said it's permanently heated, it's directly accessible, and otherwise meets all criteria.
All requirements.
Well, there was the answer right there. It's living area.
So since she knows that she should disclose it.
Yes, she still has to disclose that it's unpermitted. It is a material fact that the space is unpermitted, but it is living area because it meets the 3 criteria for living area in North Carolina.
Hey, Travis.
Yes.
I had a friend who was a real estate agent and an appraiser, and he had his whole basement accessible only through his garage, which is really weird. But would that count as finished living area then? If it was
not if it was only accessible through the garage.
Yeah, that was it. Okay, that's
Nope.
strange. Okay.
Yep.
So if you had that wasn't permitted, then what? Like, how would you rectify? Would you have to go back and?
Well, that's a whole different question.
How would it affect anything?
How would it affect anything? That's up to the buyer. That's why it's a material fact. As a listing agent, what would you simply do? There's no requirement that you rectify. You don't have to fix it. Don't make it better. All you got to do is disclose it. So what would you do as a listing agent?
Just disclose it.
Write it down and say, this
You would say,
not permitted.
the space on the 3rd floor is what?
It's finished, but wasn't permitted.
It's finished, but not permitted. That's it. And then you would let the buyer decide if that was important to them. Now, could a buyer very well decide that's important to me? I don't know if that space is safe. I don't know if I should trust it. I'm not willing to make an offer, or I'm going to pay less because that's unpermitted. Could all those things be natural conclusions the buyer comes to?
Yes.
Yes.
And that's perfectly fine. That's why you disclosed it to them. But as far as counting it as living area, you would, because it meets these 3 basic criteria.
Can
These
the
are
county come back
very
and
basic, very basic rules.
Can the county come back and fine you or something if they?
Sure,
find
they
out?
could.
Okay.
Absolutely. There's all kinds of repercussions. I'm not saying it's a good thing that space is unpermitted, but I'm saying that's not the question that's being asked. The question that's being asked there specifically is this living area? And if it meets these 3 criteria, it's living area. If it doesn't meet these 3 criteria, it's not. There are no extenuating circumstances when it comes to living area. Don't y'all hate it when I do that to you?
But it's in now that way.
That's why I do it. Because I show you where if I show you, oh, there's a hole there, I'm going to step in it. Hopefully you won't step in it next time, right? That's the point. That's why I do that.
Well,
Okay?
I appreciate that because I was turning inside about the permits.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to say anything.
It's so easy to get caught up in it, right? You know, as far as now, I'm not saying it's not a big deal. It could be a bad thing. All those things. It is a big deal, and it should be disclosed. And then you may have to deal with that, and there could be penalties and all that. But from the living area perspective, it's living area.
But we haven't done any permits yet. We haven't got to that, have we?
Chapter 6, we talk about the permitting process. Basically, just that if you make improvements on a property, you have to apply for a permit. And then you have to have the work inspected at the end to ensure that it meets basic safety codes, and that's when they issue a certificate of occupancy.
Okay.
Okay. Are we all good with the criteria? Now, as far as other rules you might be tested on square footage, measurements should happen on the exterior. I know it feels like because square footage or living area is an interior thing that you should be measuring interior. Let me tell you why we don't measure interior. If you look at a house, and even just a simple one, and you're looking down from the top, and you know that it's 30 feet deep and 50 feet wide from the outside, and you went inside, and here's what it looks like. You got 2 bedrooms back here, and there's closet, And then over here, you got a doorway and a bedroom shaped like this. And then here's a closet here. And then here's another bedroom and closet here, you know, something like that. And then here's two bathrooms. One's a master and one's this and that. And you got the living room up here. And which is easier to measure, the outside or the inside with all those damn walls in the way?
Outside.
The outside.
The outside. That's why we tell you to measure outside. We know it's almost impossible to measure inside. Does that make sense for everybody? Because if you were trying to measure inside, you'd have to measure each little section and write it down and add it together and go to the next room and around the corner. Would you miss stuff?
Yes. Yes.
Almost for sure.
Right.
So what we're going to do is we don't care about all those interior measurements. What we care about is it's 30 by 50 on the outside, 30 times 50. This is 1,500 square feet. Exterior measurements.
Not individual ones.
I'm sorry?
Not the individual ones.
Not the individual ones. Now, are we going to go inside the house at some point after we've measured outside?
Yes.
But here's what we're looking for. Stuff to take away. Not things to add, things to take away. If this was a garage, once we got inside, we found this was a garage, would we measure the garage?
Yes.
So that we could subtract it from the square footage of the house. Does that make sense for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
That's why we would measure the garage once we got inside. So that we could
high school algebra or geometry coming into play.
Yeah, right. Have fun doing your geometry. Or just hire an appraiser. Wouldn't that a good idea at this point?
Yes.
Yes.
I would gladly pay that every time.
Just hire an appraiser. So on the test, if they ask you where the measurements come from, where do they come from?
An appraiser. No, I'm just
Outside.
Outside or inside?
Outside.
Outside.
The inside doesn't fit requirements.
Right. You only measure inside, and this is what, and this is where there are some obvious gray areas. If you have spaces that you can't measure outside, like a basement or an attic, third floor, you can't measure those on the outside. If you have to, you measure stuff on the inside. But you have to basically account for the fact that the walls are there. If you look at a house like this and you measure it on the outside, and we'll use those same measurements. Say we got 30 by 50. Well, if we measure it on the inside, wouldn't our measurements be slightly less just because of the thickness of the walls? Y'all see what I'm saying? If we were measuring it inside, wouldn't we get a slightly lesser measurement measuring inside than we would outside just because the walls are a certain thickness themselves?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is everybody with me on that?
Yes.
So whenever you have to go inside to measure, they want you to add 6 inches. Add 6 inches just to account for the walls.
That will be half of the wall, right?
Don't worry about that. Don't try to get
because if you add it in the living room and the and as well as the any room that is the same wall.
Any exterior wall, add 6 inches.
Okay.
Any wall that's on the outside that you couldn't measure from the outside, add 6 inches for it. So if you have to measure a basement, can you measure a basement from the outside?
No.
No.
Not unless you brought your shovel with you, okay? Because it's underground. So you're going to have to go inside to measure that basement. And when you do, measure it, but add 6 inches for the wall to account for the walls. That's all we're saying.
So each wall.
For each wall. For each wall. But the practical answer is call an appraiser. This is only for test taking purposes. Because quite honestly, I think you're crazy if you measure these houses yourself. You got to know it for the test. But I don't think you should be doing it yourself until you're very comfortable.
It's math. No, thank you.
Things they like to throw at you on the test that really don't mean anything. What floor are stairs counted as living area? Well, how many floors are there? 2? Okay, then they count as living area on both. 3? Okay, then they count as living area on all 3. Because stairs are the same rules apply to them as anything else. If they're permanently heated, if they're interior finished, and if they have minimum ceiling height, are they living area?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
They're inside.
So they count as living area. Don't worry about them. They count. About the only time you have anything that you're going to subtract from living area that's actually living area is your second floor may be smaller than your first floor. Because a lot of houses have open ceilings, vaulted living rooms, 2-story foyers. Well, obviously that square footage does not, it's not on both floors. It's just one floor with really tall ceilings. Does that make sense for everybody? In other words, if you measured from the outside, and it's a 2-story house, and you measured from the outside and you doubled the square footage, and then you go inside and you find out, oh, the living room is a 2-story living room. Well, you pretended that space existed on both floors when you measured outside, right? Because you measured outside and you doubled the space. Except what you know now is there's a hole in the second floor where that living room is. Is everybody following me on that?
Yes.
So you would have to subtract the size of the living room from the second floor.
Okay.
So that, vaulted
Because it's
ceilings
just open space.
What kind of test question would we have involving this kind of scenario? Throw out one out.
I cannot imagine getting anything from these two other than like strictly what's here, definitional. This is not an application thing. I can't imagine how they would give you an application question. They would simply say, how do you handle open airspace like vaulted ceilings? And the answer would be, you subtract them from the second floor.
Okay.
How do you handle stairs? They count as living area on what?
On both floors.
On both floors. The application questions are going to come from here, from these 3 criteria. That's where they're going to give you a scenario.
Okay.
Okay. That's it for square footage, by the way. That's all there is for square footage.